So, hi everyone. I'm John Dickinson, Chief Commercial Officer at Equal Experts. Welcome back to Expert Talks. So, I'd like to welcome Lyndsay Brewer back to Expert Talks. Lyndsay
Hi.
is one of our hi Lyndsay. Lyndsay is one of our delivery lead consultants at Equal Experts, and he's currently working at a large public sector client that practices continuous delivery at scale across um, tens of delivery teams all working concurrently. He's our first speaker to come back to Expert Talks Online. So previously, he presented on Chaos Days and how we help clients run those and the benefits you can get from running a Chaos Day. Today, or this evening, he is joining us to talk about smoothing the path to continuous delivery and how you can do that in with different architectures. So with that, I'll stop and I will hand over to Lyndsay for the talk.
Great, thanks for the introduction, John. This talk is sharing some of the experience that I've gained over the last 10 years, working with a whole variety of teams that have been improving the way they practice continuous delivery. I think of note, there's been two teams that are very, very different in their both their architecture and their organization. And by having experience of both these different types of organizations and architectures, that's helped me draw out some common practices that I see are useful in both a monolithic type architecture and a microservice architecture, as well as practices that are helpful in particular architectures. Before we go through the different practices and how they help in these different situations, let's just kind of reset what we mean by continuous delivery and why it's important. Continuous delivery is about getting the smallest change into the hands of the customer or consumer as quickly as possible. And it has two key benefits. The first benefit is that by making the increment, the change as small as possible, you're reducing the risk of all the kind of changes that are going on into that release. And so you're reducing the risk of the number of bugs that could be entered. It gives us fast feedback because we're trying to send that change from the keyboard that the engineers are typing at all the way into production as quickly as possible. Now that couldn't be minutes, or it could be hours, or at worst, it might be a few days. Let's take the donut model that we're seeing here. If we were to make a massive donut, something that would make Homer Simpson very, very proud, then it would take a very long time and it would be very complicated to actually then provide to the customer. And when the customer starts chomping their way through it, they might discover that it's not quite to their taste and so may be very unhappy. Whereas if by making just a small donut and getting that out to the customer as quickly as possible, like in this diagram, we're getting really quick feedback from the customer whether or not we've built something to their taste. And if we got that donut wrong, then we can easily go back and change the recipe for the next one. In the talk that we had last week, the speaker stated that the Agile Manifesto's first principle talks about continuous delivery, and it says that our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. And I hadn't been struck by that until Dave Farley mentioned it last week, that continuous delivery has been talked about right from the very start of Agile's beginnings. And for this reason, it's important to focus on building something that's small, that you can put in the hands of the customer and get feedback on as quickly as possible. When I started my journey with continuous delivery, I was looking at how in the teams I was working in, we can improve the way we did continuous delivery. Because at that stage, we had, it was a private sector organization. We had a very large monolithic architecture that was very difficult to deploy to production regularly. We were just about managing to deploy it weekly. So I was doing some research into how other organizations were doing it well. What I realized through going to conferences and through talking to people and reading different articles was that there isn't one best way or best architecture for continuous delivery. There are two extremes to compare. So Etsy and Netflix They're both doing a significant amount of deploys every day. They both have a significant amount of traffic hitting their services, and yet their architectures are very different. One is heavily a microservice architecture, and the other is a monorepo, what used to be a huge PHP monolith and now is mostly JavaScript. Both those organizations are regularly deploying releases to production. But because of that, I realized that you can achieve continuous delivery with different architectures and with different organizational contexts. I realized this even more when I transferred from private sector organization to a UK government organization. So from private sector organization, there we were doing weekly deployments. We had a significant amount of traffic hitting our services, about 100 million visits a day. And it was comprised of two monoliths, one written in C#, another written in C++. In the UK government organisation, we were doing multiple deploys today. It's up to about 30 releases today now. And this organisation had a recent peak of 1,000 requests per second that hit it from pretty much nothing up to that level within a couple of hours. And that organisation is now a microservice-based architecture. So it started off as microservice and it's grown from a few microservices up to around 1,000. There's very different languages here as well. In the private sector organisation, we're predominantly Windows-based, so C# and C++, whereas in the government organisation, we're using Scala. What I'll go on to now is describe some practices that I've observed that are particular to monolithic type architectures, and some practices that are then particular to microservice architectures. I'll start by describing some things that I see as being universal to both. The building block, I think, for improving the way you practice continuous delivery is by starting with the very best people you can hire. What I mean by this is not you just go and find the most expensive engineer or someone that's got, some cool technology on their CV. You need to go and find people that speak the continuous delivery language and are familiar with how to practice it. They're fluent in it. As an analogy, if you try and remember if you've ever tried to learn a foreign language, and I had to go at learning French at school. So this is going back quite a few years now. And in the UK, when you're taught French, you're given a textbook that is 20 years old. So you're learning French 20 years ago. So you come up with all kinds of sorts of strange phrases like j'adore les bonbons, and I like ham sandwiches. I've forgotten most of my French now, you'll be pleased to hear. So trying to learn French from a textbook and also from a teacher who's working really, really hard, but she's Scottish and she's trying to teach me French in a Scottish accent. I found it quite challenging. Language isn't my gift, clearly, but what I found made it fundamentally different and so much easier was then when I went and lived in France for a few weeks. And there I was living with a French family who mostly spoke French. They didn't really have much English. And very, very quickly, through being kind of surrounded by people who were fluent in French, not only did I find that I could speak French easier, but I was actually thinking in French. And that was such a paradigm shift for me that it really made my French so much easier. So I've seen it's the same with trying to improve how teams practice continuous delivery. It's very easy for a team to read about it and to get advice from people who are outside the organization, or just have a visiting consultant come in and do a talk and give them some pointers. But a lot of the changes that you need to make to improve continuous delivery are contextual. So having people in your organization who are really, really kind of fluent in practice at doing continuous delivery well, they are a massive assistance because they can help you understand what contextual changes need to be made, how to prioritize them, and how best to approach things that will make a fundamental difference to the way your teams deliver. The next practice is all about how the way people think. In all the teams I've worked in, I think the one biggest difference to improve continuous delivery is getting people to think about production all the time. Donuts is on the Homer's mind clearly at the time. And we need to train our engineers to not think about donuts or coffee or cats or anything else that is going around the internet, which is just focused on whenever I'm trying to build something, how can I make it as small as possible to get to production as quickly as possible? How can I take this change and evolve it in production? So actually be trying to drip feed changes in production rather than create a big thing and then release it to production. And most importantly, and this is kind of something to bring up every stand-up, which I'll go on to in a minute. Every time you're doing a commit, think, what would happen if this commit went to production today? Because when your teams are practicing continuous delivery, it's quite likely that's what may happen. When I've been working with developers that are new to continuous delivery, and if I'm pairing with them, this is one of the things I'll often encourage us to think about. So when we're reviewing some code before we're committing it, what's going to happen if this were to run in production as soon as we've hit the commit button? What does this look like in practice? Well, one of the examples I was alluding to earlier was in a daily stand-up. This is one of the teams I worked with a few years ago. And one of the practices that we adopted was, instead of in our daily stand-ups doing the normal walking the board from left to right or story by story, asking, what did you do yesterday, what are you doing today, and what your block is? We made our stand-up much more focused on production. So we started with, what have we put into production recently? Is it working okay? Are we getting any feedback from it? Are we getting metrics that tell us whether we've achieved the change we wanted to do or whether we've broken anything? We don't close stuff as done as soon as it's deployed. We deliberately keep stuff in our in production column for a few days just to make sure it's settled in. We then think about, what are we about to deploy? So what is ready to go? What's either being tested or being developed and is close to it? And we discuss as a team, what's the next thing that we can do to make this, get this change as quickly into production and as safely into production as possible? What things do we need to think about when we do that release? What things do we need to be looking for? How are we going to detect if there's been a problem? How are we going to measure its effectiveness? By bringing these kind of questions up every time you're doing a stand-up, it's helping develop a culture of production thinking. I'll still do this in each of the teams I'm in today. The second fundamental practice is all about the ilities. So when I wrote this presentation about 5 years ago, my focus was there on quality, based on the book Build Quality In, which I'm co-author of. But now, as I've worked in more teams, I've realized that it's not just about building quality in. To do continuous delivery well, you need to build all of the ilities into the way your teams are thinking. So quality, security, operability, reliability. It means that instead of thinking about these things in phases, so instead of developers just focusing on building something and they throw it at the wall to the QA who has to focus on quality, then you get it pen tested by a security team, and then you give it to the poor WebOps or DevOps team, and they have to think about how the heck does this get supported, how what kind of alerts it's going to raise. All those ilities need to become the focus of everyone on the team. So when the product owner is thinking about defining, shaping a feature, they need to be working with the team to think about what kind of quality attributes should this have? How what will it do when it fails? If there's a problem downstream, how are we going to feed that back to the user? What kind of testing is appropriate to make sure that this change is going to have minimal impact on production and provide the best experience for the user? The same goes for security. The whole team needs to be thinking more at the beginning about the different security aspects of the change. When the developers start working on the change, they're also thinking then for an example of quality. So testing, making sure that they're writing tests around the code from day one, and not just thinking about unit tests, but also thinking more about integration tests or things that can focus on perhaps edge cases that they're worried about when this release goes into production. Developers should also be thinking about how this change is going to impact production from the operability perspective. So does it have the right level of alerting, of the right kind of metrics being emitted through this change? Dave Farley said last week when he was talking about continuous delivery that I think might come up as a question, how does this impact people in different roles? So you have QA engineers. Does this mean that they're redundant, or they need to change their job title? And what came up in the discussion was that if you have an expert in the team, like a QA engineer, they're there to help the whole team become better at building quality in. If you have a security expert, they're there to help the whole team improve the security of the change. Because all of those abilities are team responsibilities, and the expert's there to try and help the team get better at it. Let's move on now to some practices that I've found beneficial, particularly for monolithic architectures. When I first graduated from university, I did a degree in aeronautical engineering, and I got the most fantastic job ever as a graduate was to work on avionics software for fast jets, including this one. And I was actually working at an airbase where this thing was flying around. We had Harrier jump jets flying around, and as someone that loves airplanes, it was a really cool place to be. I'll never forget the day when we were at work, and over the loudspeaker system, this kind of siren started blaring, and there was a warning that one of the planes was coming in and it had an undercarriage fault. It wasn't going to be able to fully extend its undercarriage to land. Fortunately, no one was harmed. A few months later, a report was circulated where it went through in kind of really significant detail exactly what happened that caused that incident. And if you fast forward now to 10 years later, where I'm working in a team that is delivering the monolithic application, we're trying to do releases every week. We had significant production incidents, and so there we applied this kind of same practice. So for each production incident, we sought to analyze it and do a post-mortem on it to see what we could learn. Over time, I've evolved how I approach post-mortems or post-incident reviews, and I've gone from taking a 5 whys approach, where you can ask, well, why did this incident happen, then why did that happen, and you can basically go down and down and down. I've changed through learning things like Etsy's approach and reading Google's SRE handbook and listening to various talks by John Orspool. I've dropped the 5 whys because I've realized that actually 5 whys can be quite harmful when you're working with teams that are using it as a way of getting to the root cause. The reason is that when you're asking someone why quite a lot, they often feel kind of blamed. Even if you're trying to do it in as kind of no blame way as possible, it still seems to be something that strikes people very personally. So I've changed to, instead of doing postmortems using 5 whys, I've gone on to using kind of much more neutral language and language that is focused on helping draw out the lessons learned from a postmortem. What is it that people have learned through trying to understand this incident, resolve it, and come up with how they might improve things in the future? What things they learned about A, the system itself, and then B, what they learned about how they work with the system. So what kind of ways do people detect problems in the system? Highly recommend, if you've not read it, Etsy's facilitation guide for going through postmortems. And the basic approach it's kind of advocating is that when you're facilitating, it's helpful to understand the timeline a little bit ahead of time, and so basically have like chapter headings for the timeline. Collect together some data about what happened. So it means that you're not starting with a completely blank piece of paper. Make sure that you invite people who were involved in the post-mortem, and help kind of involve them in the conversation in a non-blaming way. So a lot of the time in post-mortems, it's the engineers that were involved in resolving it, nothing more. But having people like who was on support that noticed, which kind of customer-facing team noticed, did anyone receive a call from a customer? Having a range of people involved just helps the lessons get shared kind of more effectively. I find it's useful having a starting point as well. So there's some initial curious questions that just can help guide people's kind of thinking. The next practice that I found useful with monolithic architectures is automating release notes. So we grew this organization from just 2 teams that were trying to deliver every week to about 7 teams. When 7 teams are working on a single monolith, it does get quite complicated. I don't know if people have worked out how many differences there are in this picture, but every week when we were preparing the release to go to production, we were having to play spot the difference. We were having to look at, okay, what do we have in production right now? And how has it changed? How have all these commits from 7 different teams across a week altered the behavior of production? And when we were new at this process, we basically had a text file that was under source control, which is great, right? But it was a text file that people were having to write in to say, I've changed this, it's in this build. And we quickly realized that that wasn't sustainable and it wasn't helping. So there's all the changes. I hope you spotted most of them. So this is what we built to help with that. The source of truth for what's changed is your source control system. And what we created was a release note generator that goes off to production, looks at what the version is there. You give it a candidate release number, and then it uses those 2 version numbers to effectively do a diff from your source control system of everything that's changed between those versions. We set up our source control system to be linked with our Agile project management tool. So every commit should have had some kind of reference to a piece of work in the source control system. Sorry, in the Agile project management tool, like a story ID or something. And that would allow us then to group the changes by story or defect, say what state they're in, because we were often, we were doing trunk-based development, so the changes going to production that weren't ready to be exposed to our users, but they would be feature toggled or hidden in some way. We had this tool divide up the application into areas, so you could say, there were these changes in the payments area, without having to go basically look at the line of code and work out which area is impacting. And it told you who the authors were. And that kind of summary was extremely valuable because it enabled the team that were doing the testing of the release and preparing to get it into production to understand, what was the difference here? Who were the people, if they wanted to get more information, to go and talk to? It also highlighted work that had been done, changes that had been done without tracking it against any particular story or defect. And this sometimes happens, of course, doesn't it? And it's really useful drawing out work that's just been done out of the goodness of people's hearts without any real reason, because that can often present a lot of risk. Let's move on now to microservice architectures. I think the one fundamental thing that I've found help in pretty much every organization I've been to is ownership. Currently the government organization is a very large platform. So we have over 1,000 microservices, and those microservices combine to enable users to transact in about 130 different types of ways through the platform. And it integrates with a large number of legacy and third-party systems. The way we've grown this platform, this organization, to ensure that we can keep releasing, so we're up to about 30 or 40 releases a day, is by ensuring that microservices are owned by one team. And if a team owns a microservice, then they're the people that operate it. They're the people that receive alerts for it. They're the people that have access to all the kind of telemetry, so the logs, the dashboards, the metrics for that microservice. They're the people you go to, or who someone on support or a customer contact center needs to go to if there's a problem. That's resulted in us having about 60 service teams, the teams that are building the public-facing services. We're taking the same approach of ownership with our platform teams as well. Because of the size of this platform, we've got a large number of teams supporting it. We call them platform teams, and they have their own particular focuses. So, for instance, we have a team that is solely responsible for the collaboration tooling that is used by all the other teams, so things like Slack and Jira, Confluence. We have a team that helps all the other teams improve their approach to security. We have a team solely responsible for our our build and deployment system to make sure that can be used reliably and efficiently by all these 60 teams doing 30 or 40 releases a day. The list goes on, but it's really important that each of these teams has a kind of clear remit of which components do they own and which components are they responsible for effectively the kind of roadmap for. Werner Vogel summarized this really well when he said, "You build it, you run it." And this is a mantra that I kind of repeat in pretty much any organization, any team I'm in, that if a team is building something, they're the people that need to understand how is it going to work in production and how we're going to support it. And when something goes wrong with it, they're the people that need to know first and need to be able to respond first. By instilling that kind of mindset in teams, that helps teams can get stuff into production faster and more efficiently and repeatedly as well. One of the lessons that was quite hard to learn in the microservice organization was the importance of being considerate to other teams. When we started growing this platform, there were only about 10 to 15 teams involved to start off with. And as it was growing quite fast, the microservices had dependencies, right? So there were some core microservices like authentication or auditing that other more customer-facing microservices would use. As the system evolved, so someone would change the authorization microservice, it would break everything else. And this caused a lot of frustration, a lot of tension, and we weren't quite sure what to do about it. And over time, we realized the importance of being considerate and thinking much more about the other teams, the other consumers of your microservices. I think the most significant way of thinking about this is that when you move to a microservice structure and you have clear team ownership, then each team, their customers are the other teams. Their customers are the teams whose microservices talk to your microservice, as well as the actual people outside of your organization that are getting benefit. Because any change that your team makes to your microservice or your API or library, the moment you commit that, it's likely to be first impacting other teams. By helping think of them as your primary customers, that's quite a mindset change to what you're doing. As we were grappling with this problem, one of the teams came up with the idea that a good way to approach this was actually for every team to have their own microenvironment where they could redeploy the whole system, all of the microservices, and they could fix the versions of all the other microservices they depended on. And problem solved, right? Because it meant that they'd be testing against known versions of these other microservices. There wouldn't be any changes happening underneath their kind of feet that they had to worry about. Now, fortunately, our infrastructure team at the time realized that the fallacy of this, and that when you're doing continuous delivery, things are changing the whole time in production. So you can't necessarily predict what version of a microservice you might be coding against. Particularly as at that time we weren't versioning our microservices, and we tend still not to. So the approach they advocated that we're stuck with today is this importance of sharing through caring. So we still use the same environment for each of our teams. So microservices are being deployed to each of the environments the whole time. And that means that forces teams to actually think then, okay, when I deploy the change to this microservice and it goes to the development environment, to the QA environment, it's going to be used by all the other teams on the platform. How is it going to impact them? Is it going to break anything for them? Because with 60 other teams using your microservice continuously, you don't want to be the team that breaks it for the others and causes lots of stress. That was a pretty whistle-stop tour of 6 plus the kind of 0 practices that I've found helpful to improve or smooth the continuous delivery path. There's various other techniques for helping teams improve their continuous delivery, and we can probably cover some of those through questions in the Fishbowl section that we're going to go on to. But I just want to say thank you for kind of bearing with me as I've rambled on a bit. John, shall I hand over you now to cover the Fishbowl approach?
That would be great. Thanks, Lyndsay. Right, so normally I have a small amount of time to cover while the panelists are brought in by Steve, but everyone's here at the minute. So what I'm going to do is, well, first of all, say again, thank you very much, Lyndsay. That was brilliant. And then I'm going to just change this, change the view here. So we've got gallery view. And then hopefully everybody can see the panelists. Can I just get a quick like a yes or a thumbs up in the chat or something to say that people can see all the panelists now? John Estadale, thanks, John. Yep, thanks, Werner. Okay, brilliant. So what we're going to do now is we're going to run a fishbowl for anybody who has been to expert talks online before. The fishbowl is where we have a rotating panel that are answering some of the questions from the audience. So I noticed there's only one question in Q&A at the minute. So if you have any other, if anybody has any questions that they would like the panel to cover, if you can look at the two speech bubbles, the Q&A icon at the bottom of the Zoom, click on that, put your question in, and then we'll, and then if also people can have a look, and when there's more than one, vote up the questions that you're most interested in seeing answered. And if anybody from the audience does want to join the panel, then you can use the raise hand feature, and we have Steve in the background. And he'll bring people in to the panel and will remove anybody who hasn't spoken for a while from the panel. So the last thing to say is for people in the panel, normally we have, when we do this in the physical world, in the physical environment, we have a rugby ball that we use like a conch, and then if you want to talk, you signal, go give me the rugby ball, and I'll speak next. What we'll use, if you could use the mute and unmute button. So if you want to talk next, but you're not talking already as a panelist, press unmute, and then that's a signal that someone can kind of give way and let you say something. Right, I have stalled long enough for us to get more than one question in the Q&A. Oh, three now. This is brilliant. Thank you, everybody. So if people take a look at the Q&A and then and vote on the ones they would like. Mark, I'm going to answer yours first because you're the first one in. And you got a thumbs up as well. Well done. Brilliant. So I'll read this one out first. I'll read it out for the panel because I think I see them in a slightly different order to everybody else. So the first question is from Mark Olivier. Oh, hold on. I said I was going to answer one live and it's gone. There we go. Right. Mark's question is, would you keep the dev assigned on the ticket to observe it in production for a few days, to watch it technically, so to say, as I'd assume that the product owner would be watching it like a hawk after being released to prod already? And does a dev pick up a new ticket at the same time, or keep the rule of one dev, one ticket? And this is, I remember Mark put this question in when we were talking about, Lyndsay, when you're saying about walking the board, start at the right, and we keep tickets on around on the board in the production column.
Sure, okay. So I'll tell you how our current team works. So there's two types of people that would be watching kind of production behavior for a new ticket that's been released. That would be the person that put it into production or kind of responsible for it going to production. That might be our QA that did the release, or it might be one of the developers that did the release. So they would still be assigned to it and would do some follow-up. It might be somebody else in the team that either has the spare capacity or a special interest or the ability to look into it. So there was a change that our team released a couple of days ago that I assigned myself to, so I could check on it because I had kind of, special access to a system that allowed me to do that. We also have a rotating support person in our team. So each person in the team, across the whole team, so including the product owner and the QA, are on support on a daily basis, and they are there to pick up any questions from other teams, as well as looking out for any issues in production. So there'll be another person that will be looking out for issues in production arising from a recent deploy. In terms of whether we'd stop that person from being assigned to other things, no, we don't. We're not so strict on that because the check is something that could be done straight away, or it might be something that needs a few days to do. We generally have that person assigned to a at least a couple of things, so they're beyond that ticket and also be picking up other work. Does anyone else on the panel want to add anything to that? Okay, if that's answered your question, Mark.
Yeah, sorry, I did want to add something. I think one of the things is that it does sort of require, I think Lyndsay sort of doing himself an injustice by not pointing out that it requires a team with a certain level, one, of autonomy and a certain level of maturity of organization, such that they have the confidence and the ability and the enlightenment, actually, for the product owner and the QA to basically jump in and take equal levels of responsibility, because there's trust and collaboration to the extent that they don't feel unsupported.
Okay, great. So some cultural changes as well as just some process changes. All right, excellent. Thank you, Mark. I'm going to mark that as done, and then I'll go up to the. So now we are back to the pattern of the short questions rise to the top. So Alex, we're going to answer your question now, or at least talk about it. So how does a monolith release multiple times a day? How do you make your build deployment that fast?
I'll have a go if you like. So this is possible. It sounds counterintuitive, but it's the same as everything else. It's like leaning into the pain points. So thinking of a large retailer that we worked on their monolith for, a lot of bringing the release time down was actually working with testing teams and external teams. So obviously going to Lyndsay's talk there about, this wasn't so much of a microservice architecture, but a monolith one. And a lot of it was the politics and talking to people and sort of building up confidence very, very slowly. I think over a period of 6 months, that sort of release time went down from, I think, once every 4 weeks to multiple times in a week. So maybe not daily like the question, but yeah, certainly possible. And just by working with external teams and then automating those basic steps.
I'll add to this also. I think like with even with microservices, I think don't do work you don't need to do when you do a build. And so effectively, that's why release engineering is a discipline. I think understanding and adopting good release tools and build tools where appropriate can go a long way also. It's not just the tools, it's knowing when to apply them and where to apply them.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Dan. I was going to ask a question, kind of follow up to the panel actually on this, because one of the things in Lyndsay's talk which is really interesting is when you go into an organization, it's got a monolith. How do you do continuous delivery of a monolith? Or if it's got a microservice architecture, how do you do that? But as a panel, what do we, if we could go in and we could start from scratch and it said one of our key goals, everything else being equal, one of our key goals is continuous delivery, would we pick one architecture over the other, or really it doesn't make any difference?
For me, I'm not too precious on the monolith or the microservice. What I'm really interested in is like having a path to deploy that and the frequency of deployment. That's the really key thing for me. So when I listen to Lyndsay's talk, what really jumps out is that both of those architectures share the deploy word. And for me, that's the key focus.
And I think being a consultancy, I think I think part of our job, if we are to do it well and responsibly, is to be sensitive to our clients' needs and ensure we understand what fits, our clients, because, it's, and what fits, their use cases.
Cool. We've had Stuart join us. Steve has brought him in. Steve, can you boot out one of the other panelists? Drum roll. Oh, Lyndsay's got his thumb up, so let's pop Lyndsay out. Was there something you wanted to say immediately, Stu? I just had a follow-up question for something Ali said.
I was just wanting to chip in on the point of does the architecture of the system dictate or have an influence on the release cycle of that system? And in my experience, I've seen and worked on systems that have been really slow to release and really hard to deploy that have been microservice architectures. And I've also worked on systems that have been monoliths, which we've had fantastic, really quick routes to production, maybe a couple of times a day, which, 7-8 years ago was very, very quick. And a question maybe around the fact that people maybe conflate these things and see microservices architecture as a silver bullet to continuous deployment, and how we get around these problems and see them as completely separate subjects.
I mean, I think one of the motivations on that question is that there was a Q&A with Neil Ford that I saw a while back, and he said microservices was a superpower for continuous integration, continuous delivery. So, or is one of the superpowers on microservices, its ability to do that. So I think I'm totally in agreement. You can have and I've seen it, a microservices architecture that can't do continuous delivery because it's not been architected well. But at the same time, if we were to have a choice, would it make us pick that? Because it does make some of the processes Lyndsay mentioned about trying to change the process so that we can work in it. Would we be able to avoid that? But as Ali said, most of the time, I can't remember the last time I got to do a completely greenfield project. Unfortunately, I try and find them, but they don't exist very often. So there you go.
Oh, sorry, Daniel.
Well, just to make it interesting, we talk about monoliths, we talk about microservices, and I'm sure in a few years' time we'll be talking about how we deploy our serverless architectures and, how we get to sort of continuous delivery in the next context and the next form of architecture. And it sort of seems appealing at first to go, we'll make these smaller things and get them to talk together. And there's this weird counterintuitiveness to, I think there's a lot of value in teams focusing on a sort of monolith and seeing the scaffolding of doing deployments and releases and then applying those into further granular things.
Cool. I had one last question, something Ali you said that I just wanted to come back to before we move on to the next question, which is you said it's about actually don't do the work that you don't need to do when deploying. When we're talking about can you deploy monoliths, how do you build them and deploy them that fast? Could you just give some examples of what you mean by work that you don't need to do?
Effectively, so if you were to look at straight up software stuff, memorization, right? It's a classic concept of if you've done the work already, fetch it out of somewhere you've saved it. Whereas, don't rebuild the world every single time. That's expensive. Just the physics of things. Writing to disk costs time. Don't write to disk if you don't have to. Compilation costs time, or running tests costs time. Obviously, don't be foolhardy, but have intelligence in your build to ensure that you need to run tests. If you haven't made a change that qualifies running a test suite, don't run a test suite.
Great, excellent. So even though you've got a monolith deployment, it doesn't mean you have to build the whole thing every time. It can still be modularized.
Well, yeah, I mean, so, make, for example, it only compiled the stuff that you needed to compile, that you changed.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, Alex, thanks very much for that question. That was that got to the heart of a lot of things. That's brilliant, thank you. I'm glad Kevin Santi's question got bumped up because it was joined with a couple of others and was lower down, but I was going to pick it anyway because it's interesting and thorny. So Kevin is asking, defects in production platforms can take days or weeks to emerge after a deployment. How is this handled in an environment that is continuously or continually being changed? Sure.
I'll give it a go and see where we go from there. But I think one of the points of a continuous delivery is that you are continuously looking at these issues and you're continually fixing them, and it comes about. And actually, look at the question, I think quite often things don't come out for days afterwards, but the point is it should only come out on the last time you kind of released it. So you're doing these testing, you're seeing it all the time, and that's fine. If you're doing multiple releases a day and it comes out days afterwards. I'm assuming this is from a process perspective, but it comes out days afterwards. Then you'll fix it on the same day as well, hopefully. You know, as long as it's not a really gnarly bug, but that sort of thing, I think.
Yeah.
See what someone.
I'd back that up, really. You know, as soon as you find defects, you know, I do believe they should be important. You know, you should try and achieve as minimal defects as you can in live. So robust testing procedures, robust release procedures. So enabling teams to be able to act autonomously in testing their own software, even if that's the monolith, but the changes they're making in there, and striving to catch them as early as you can. So building quality into the process early on, rather than just kind of fixing things that you find once they're in live.
Yeah, I'd also, I'd say, harping back to Lyndsay's talk and just having a sort of culture of production excellence and thinking in production terms and operational readiness. So like the things Stu's just saying there, all the things that help us get operational readiness into production, and then constantly observing it, having good monitoring, having good observability. I think, you know, it's interesting how the question's phrased, like when is it a defect, when is it observed? You know, can we reduce that cycle time down? And finally, I'd say that production is a constantly changing environment that's dynamic. So our capacity to observe that is sort of the key, I think.
I think supplementing that to Dan's point, like provenance, like in fine art, matters in systems, right? So can I actually trace back down to the line of source code, you know, or down to the build, you know, what's running? That's essential. The moment you can do that, there's power, right? Because you're no longer just hunting around. You know that this artifact is generated off of this point in time in source control. And that's a supremely powerful construct or powerful tool to have within your systems.
Mm. And the ability to release fast as well, and have confidence in releasing fast through that. If you can get a fix out very quickly, then it's not as risky for a defect to have already got into live if you can constrain that and stop it becoming a problem.
Yeah, I'd sort of echo some of the confidence stuff there, you know, like the confidence of the pipeline and the confidence of observing production. And as we can iterate that, we can improve it more. Deeper confidence, it allows us to sort of estimate tasks even better and have more confidence in how we talk to the business. And it contributes to this massive sort of culture of, you know, the virtuous circle.
All right, brilliant. Thank you, everybody. So thanks for that question, Kevin. I'll close that off. And we've got, so from Neil now, I think this is the next one. Neil McLaughlin, in a world where you build it, you run it, at what levels should the abstraction be? For example, in a microservices Kubernetes architecture, should a microservices team have a deep knowledge of Kubernetes, or can that be abstracted to a platform team?
I'll have a go. Sorry, I'm conscious I'm doing a lot of talking, but this is something I'm passionate about, and then I'll shut up. So I'm sort of not, I don't push for the abstraction so much anymore, but taking the context that we exist in, how we're going to build our platform, and then encouraging really what the teams want their boundaries to be, and then how we create a sort of awesome interface between that. That's my sort of, really strong desire and push with people.
I think the way you would look at the abstraction with the platform these days, if you were to have a platform team, is the same way you would look at the abstraction with any other microservice that is run and created and managed by another team. You have knowledge of it, you know it exists, you possibly know its contract and how you're speaking to it. Well, you should know its contract, how it speaks to it. You probably may well know the inner workings of it, but actually it's still run and controlled and managed by this other team. And I think you can consider a platform, whether it's Kubernetes or whether you are using Lambda or whatever, it's just a one big microservice that someone else is managing for you, and you treat it in the same way. But if I've built a microservice or my team has built a microservice, I own it. I've started using the phrase custodian of it more than an owner, because I don't mind people building in it and changing it, but I'm the one who is responsible for it, and if it goes wrong, I will be there to manage it. So I think I treat a platform in exactly the same way as I treat any other business-based microservice.
Okay, great. Right, thank you, Neil, for that. So our next question is from another one from Mark Olivia. How would you do a staged percentage release while slowly releasing the features as well? Does that need some clarity from people?
Maybe
So, yeah, Mark, if you could.
I'm wondering if Mark is referring to often release and deployment are very coupled, and through use of feature switches, which you can use platforms to give certain percentage of customers a version, or the old version or the new version, or a variety of versions. And by feature switching everything, that can increase in that confidence in being able to release to live, because you've decoupled actually getting your code deployed into live from the release of it to customers. So I don't know if that sort of answers your question there. If not, yeah, please clarify.
Yeah, he said I likes that. He said he likes that. Thanks. Thanks, Ali. Actually, that helps. Yep. So I think you got it there, Stu.
Cool.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. Okay, so we've got 5 minutes left. If anybody does want to pop their hand up for a quick joining the panel towards the end, then that's great. But we will finish at 7. Stu, I'm going to, sorry, because you jumped onto the panel. I'm going to put yours to the end, because Stuart Pearce has got a question here saying, in a regulated environment, e.g., health tech, how do you see external review and certification processes integrate to a continuous delivery approach?
Nobody else is going to chip in there. I'll just say a lot of it is about building those thought processes into the team. Again, as was being described, I can't remember who earlier was saying around getting the whole team, it might have been in Lyndsay's talk, about getting the whole team thinking about what happens into production. Again, what happens with the security. So build it into that process. Don't make it something that has to be signed off towards the end, but something that you've got confidence in. Again, so coming back to this topic of confidence.
I think possibly the most I think possibly the most regulated environments we know, which are things like surgery, right? People have checklists, and what we do is we sign off those checklists. When people start up planes, they have checklists. Unfortunately, humans have to do that. When we work with computers can do that. Computers are very good at doing things repeatedly with precision at high volume. So when you can achieve that and you can codify it, I think you're winning.
Yeah, the checklist Manifesto, Atul Gawande, highly recommend it, because that's where that sort of stuff comes from.
Even just on a really basic level, what Lyndsay was talking about automating the release notes process could
yes.
into those regulated environments as well, where you need to have those release notes.
Yeah, totally. We might be able to connect you, Stuart, with somebody in the network, because we did this for a healthcare company. And it took 3 years, but they did it.
Excellent. All right. So, Stuart, if you can reach out to Dan on LinkedIn, talk to him about it. The other thing I'm reminded, two things Dave Farley was saying last week in his talk, which was, first of all, continuous delivery does not equal continuous deployment. Continuous delivery is the ability to release whenever you choose, but deployment is a business decision. So that's the first element. And then the second element is, Dave also talked about operating and deploying software in a financial regulated environment, and exactly the point that I think Ali and Dan just made about the checks are automated and happen all the time. So if the checks align to that certification process, then you're doing them constantly and consistently throughout the pipeline. Great. Okay, so we've got 2 minutes to spare, but I'm gonna call time there because I've already spending a lot of time probably still in front of their screens. Although hopefully I hope everybody is managing to do more work away from Zoom in their working time, less video calls and video conferences. Thank you everybody for joining us. I want to say thank you again to Lyndsay for the talk. Big thank you to Ali, Dan, Stuart, and Rita for joining the panel. And also thank you everybody for all the questions. That was excellent. We are running a series of talks on continuous delivery. Dave Farley kicked us off last week. Lyndsay obviously gave a talk today. Next week we are talking about measuring continuous delivery with Steve Smith. And then the week after that, I believe we have Ben Conrad from HMRC will be talking about how HMRC are following continuous delivery approaches. And then the week after that, we have Stuart joining us. Sorry, so many names. I've forgotten Stuart's surname. Can someone prompt me?
Gunter.
Stuart Gunter, thank you so much, Rita. So Stuart will be joining us to talk about secure continuous delivery, enabling security. I'm hoping we will have another excellent talk, which I will reveal later, coming after that. And then we within the series, I think we'll end up, we're getting so many great questions, we're going to end up running a full fishbowl session with all of the speakers and from throughout the series. So there's lots more great stuff to come. We'll be sending out the video after this. We'll be updating you all of that full schedule once we have got it up and deployed for you to see and sign up to. And so until next time, I'll say thank you very much. And then everyone from the panel, if you just want to give us a big shout and wave. And brilliant. Thanks all. All right, we'll see you next time.